Daniel had lived on his farm for many years, and during that time, he had learned how to manage almost everything on his own. He could repair fences, fix tractors, plant crops, and take care of animals without needing anyone's help. But there was one thing he never seemed to have the time or energy for: cleaning the inside of his farmhouse. The house was not small, and years of dust had quietly settled into corners, on shelves, and on old furniture. Whenever he came home after long hours in the fields, he would tell himself he would clean tomorrow. But tomorrow always came with new work, new problems, and more tired evenings. Slowly, the house became cluttered and heavy with old memories. One evening, after tripping over a pile of newspapers he had meant to throw away months ago, Daniel finally accepted that he needed help. It wasn't easy for him to reach that decision. He had always been a private man. He didn't like strangers entering his home, and he didn't enjoy explaining himself. But this time, he didn't have a choice. So he wiped his hands on his dusty jeans, walked to the small workspace near the kitchen, and wrote a simple message to post in the town. Cleaning help needed. One-day job, fair pay. Contact Daniel Miller. He printed a few copies and drove into town the next morning. He posted the ads at the community board, the small grocery store, and the bakery that everyone visited. After that, he drove back to his farm, expecting that it might take a week or more for someone to respond, maybe even longer, since his place was far from the main road and most people preferred jobs in the town. The next morning, Daniel was eating a quiet breakfast when his phone buzzed. He frowned because very few people called him. When he checked the message, he was surprised to see it came from a young woman named Emma. She wrote politely, saying she had seen the ad and was interested in the cleaning job. She told him she had experience and was looking for short-term work. Daniel had barely finished reading her message when his phone buzzed again. This time, it was another young woman named Grace. Her message was more energetic, almost cheerful, saying she and a friend had been searching for work in town but found nothing. She asked if the job was still open and whether she could come to the farm the same day. Daniel stared at the phone, confused. He had expected maybe one reply in a week, but 2 messages came on the same morning. And they were both from young women. He wasn't used to dealing with people, especially strangers, and the idea of having 2 of them at the same time made him a little nervous. But he also knew he needed help more than ever. So he sat down on the old wooden chair in his kitchen and thought for a moment. Hiring both could mean the work finished faster, and it wasn't polite to tell someone no when they were asking sincerely. After a few minutes, he messaged both of them back, telling them they could come in the afternoon to meet him. When the clock reached 2, Daniel heard the sound of a car approaching. He stepped outside just in time to see a small silver car stop near his gate. 2 girls stepped out. The first one, Emma, had a calm look on her face. She wore simple clothes and carried a notebook. She smiled softly, greeting Daniel with a polite voice. The second girl, Grace, stepped out with a bright expression, waving at him even before she reached the porch. She seemed full of energy, talking quickly and asking questions before Daniel even had the chance to reply. Daniel wasn't sure how the 2 girls even knew each other or if they were friends, but they seemed comfortable together. He invited them inside. As soon as they stepped into the farmhouse, they stopped and looked around. The living room had boxes stacked on one side, books scattered on another, and dust sitting like a thin blanket on almost everything. Daniel felt embarrassed. He wanted to explain, but words didn't come easily to him. But instead of judging or laughing, the girls simply nodded. Emma spoke first, saying it wasn't as bad as she expected and that they could handle it. Grace, on the other hand, joked that the house needed a good wake-up shake, making Daniel smile for the first time that day. Daniel walked them through the rooms, showing the kitchen, the storeroom, and the long hallway that led to the bedrooms. He didn't want them to enter his bedroom, so he made that clear. The girls understood immediately. After the little tour, the 3 of them sat at the dining table to discuss the work. Daniel explained that he didn't know much about how to organize or where to begin, so he wanted them to take the lead. Emma asked questions about what he wanted to keep or throw away. Grace, meanwhile, kept noticing small details like windows that needed washing or carpets that needed shaking outside. While the girls talked, Daniel watched them, trying to understand their personalities. Emma had a calm confidence. She seemed like someone who planned before she acted. Grace was the opposite: fast, lively, always moving, always pointing out something new. At first, Daniel wondered if they would clash while working, but the more they talked, the more he realized they balanced each other surprisingly well. After agreeing on everything, the girls said they could start the next morning. Daniel felt relieved. Before they left, Emma asked gently if he lived alone. Daniel hesitated but nodded. Grace's expression softened. She didn't ask anything more, but he could tell the question stayed in her mind. When their car drove away, the farmhouse felt strangely quiet. Daniel walked through the rooms they had just seen. For the first time, he looked at them through someone else's eyes. Dusty surfaces, old items he never used, photographs of his childhood still in the same place for 10 years. He felt a little embarrassed, but also hopeful. Maybe their arrival meant something more than just cleaning. Maybe this was the beginning of a small change. The next morning, the girls arrived early and ready. Emma carried her notebook again, and Grace brought cleaning supplies she had bought with her own money because she wasn't sure what Daniel had at home. Daniel was touched by that. He never expected strangers to put in extra effort. Before they started, Daniel made simple tea for all of them. They stood on the porch, drinking quietly. Grace kept pointing at the fields, saying she had never seen so much open land in her life. Emma listened, smiling occasionally. When the tea was finished, the girls walked inside and began working. Daniel stayed nearby, unsure whether he should help or stay out of their way. Emma noticed his hesitation and requested politely that he sit for a while because they needed space to arrange things. Daniel obeyed, though he felt strange doing nothing. From the living room, he heard their voices, Emma calmly giving instructions and Grace laughing at her own jokes. The house, for the first time in years, sounded alive. Dust rose and sunlight spread across the floor as they opened windows. Old curtains were taken down and shaken outside. Furniture was shifted and boxes were opened one by one. At one point, the girls found an old photo album. They didn't touch it at first. Emma called Daniel over, asking if the pictures were important. When he opened the album and saw the faded faces of his parents, he felt something tighten in his chest. The girls watched quietly, not pushing him to speak. After a minute, he told them small things, how his mother used to bake bread, how his father sang while fixing tools. The girls listened with genuine interest, and Daniel felt something he had not felt in years. Someone actually cared to hear his story. As they returned to their work, Daniel noticed something beautiful. He had hired them to clean the house, but without realizing it, they were already cleaning something inside him too. Something heavier than dust, something he had ignored for years: his loneliness. The next morning began with a gentle sunlight spreading across the fields. Daniel had already been awake for hours, doing small chores outside while waiting for the girls to arrive. He wasn't used to waiting for anyone. But now he found himself checking the road again and again. When he finally heard the sound of a car approaching, he felt a quiet relief wash over him. Emma and Grace stepped out, both carrying fresh energy as if the farm itself pulled them back. Grace greeted Daniel with her usual cheerful wave, her voice light and warm. Emma offered a calmer smile, asking politely if Daniel had slept well. He nodded, though he didn't tell them he had slept better than usual, probably because he knew they were coming. For years he had eaten breakfast alone in silence, but now he found himself preparing extra plates, just in case they wanted something to eat. He didn't say anything, but he placed a small tray of biscuits on the kitchen table before they began their work. The girls walked inside the house and looked around at the progress they had made the previous day. Even though there was still a lot to do, the house already felt different, less heavy, less lonely. Grace stretched her arms and said they should start with the kitchen today because it was calling for help. Emma agreed, but added that they should also organize the storeroom because it held many items that Daniel didn't even remember owning. Daniel joined them for a while, helping move some boxes, but Emma quickly noticed he was lifting too much at once. She gently told him to take it slow because the work would take time and they needed him healthy. Daniel felt a bit embarrassed, but he appreciated her concern. Grace teased him lightly, saying he acted like he was carrying the whole world on his shoulders. Even Daniel couldn't help but smile. As they cleaned, Grace opened every window she could find, letting fresh air flow inside. She said the house needed to breathe. Emma began taking notes of items they should keep and items Daniel might want to give away. With every cabinet they opened, they found something old: dishes Daniel's mother once used, tools his father made, letters that had never been read again. Each small discovery led to brief conversations that revealed more of Daniel's past. One moment stood out clearly. Grace found an old wooden box with a broken lock. She called Daniel over and asked if they should open it. Daniel hesitated because he didn't remember what was inside, but with a quiet breath, he nodded. When they finally lifted the lid, they found small items belonging to his parents: a pocket watch, a ribbon, a few handwritten notes. Daniel stood still for a long moment, holding the watch gently. Emma placed a soft hand on his arm, offering silent support. She didn't say anything unnecessary. Grace stood quietly as well, sensing the importance of the moment. After a while, Daniel closed the box and decided to keep it somewhere safe, thanking the girls for handling it with respect. Later in the afternoon, they moved to the storeroom. This room was the most cluttered area in the house. Dust floated in the air the moment they opened the door, and piles of forgotten items covered almost every corner. Grace made a small joke about it being a treasure cave, while Emma made a plan to clear one section at a time. Daniel watched the girls work with surprising teamwork. Grace's speed and Emma's organization made a perfect balance. Grace would pull items out, and Emma would sort them carefully. Sometimes they laughed over something unexpected: a strange tool, an old magazine, or a toy Daniel didn't even remember buying. Daniel tried helping, but often found himself standing still, listening to them talk. Their voices filled the house in a way he hadn't heard in years. Sometimes they asked him questions about his childhood, and sometimes they simply talked about their own lives. Emma mentioned she was trying to save money for college. Grace said she was helping her family with rent and part-time jobs. Their honesty surprised Daniel. He didn't expect them to share so much with him, yet they did it with natural ease. When they took a break, Daniel offered them water and sat with them on the porch. They asked him about farming, how he managed everything alone, and whether it ever felt overwhelming. Daniel found himself answering more than he planned. He talked about waking up before sunrise, about the calm of early mornings, about the tough days during storms, and about how he sometimes wished he had someone to talk to, but never said it out loud. Grace listened with bright eyes, and Emma listened with deep understanding. Their break didn't last long because Grace jumped up, saying she didn't want to lose the cleaning spirit. The three of them went back inside. As they continued, Daniel noticed something he had never seen clearly before. His house wasn't just dirty, it was full of old burdens he had never dealt with. And the girls, without knowing it, were slowly helping him face them one by one. By late afternoon, the storeroom began to show real progress. The floor, once invisible under the clutter, could now be seen. Boxes were stacked neatly. Items were labeled. The air felt lighter. Grace wiped her forehead dramatically, pretending she had won a great battle. Emma shook her head, teasing her, saying she had only won half a battle. Daniel felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, pride mixed with gratitude. He realized he never would have achieved this alone. And the surprising thing was that he didn't mind their presence. In fact, he found himself looking forward to their voices, their questions, and even their playful arguments. As evening arrived, Daniel invited them to stay for dinner. He didn't cook anything complicated, just simple meals he knew how to make. Grace praised his cooking loudly, saying he should open a small food stall in town. Emma smiled and agreed quietly. Daniel felt his face warm with embarrassment, but also genuine happiness. It had been years since someone sat at that table with him. During dinner, the girls asked Daniel why he had never hired help before. He shrugged and said he didn't think he needed it. Grace shook her head, saying everyone needs help sometimes. Emma added softly that it was okay to accept support, and it didn't make a person weak. Daniel thought about their words long after they finished eating. Before they left for the night, the girls walked through the house again, checking their progress. They promised to return the next morning and continue. Grace said she had new ideas for making the living room feel alive again. Emma said she wanted to finish the storeroom completely. Daniel felt grateful they cared so much about the place. When their car drove away, Daniel stood at the doorway for a long time. The house wasn't fully clean yet, but it felt different, lighter, warmer, and full of life. He walked through the rooms slowly. The dust was thinner, the air fresher, and the clutter smaller. But the biggest change wasn't something he could touch. It was the feeling inside him. The feeling that maybe things didn't have to stay the same forever. That night, Daniel sat by his window, looking out at the quiet fields. He thought about the two girls who had walked into his life unexpectedly. He realized they weren't just cleaning his house. They were cleaning the silence he had lived with for years. They were bringing something he had forgotten existed: company, warmth, and the simple joy of having someone to talk to. He went to bed that night with a lighter heart, knowing the next morning would bring their cheerful voices again. The sun rose quietly the next day, sending soft golden light across the fields. Daniel woke up earlier than usual, not because of farm work, but because he knew Emma and Grace would arrive soon. His house had not been this active in years, and for the first time, he felt excited to continue something inside the house instead of outside. He prepared tea and placed fresh water on the table, hoping the girls would feel welcomed. When their car finally appeared down the dusty road, Daniel stepped out before they even parked. Grace jumped out with her usual energy, waving like she was greeting an old friend. Emma got out more calmly, but her warm smile made Daniel feel at ease immediately. They both looked ready to work harder than yesterday. Inside, the girls walked straight to the storeroom to check their progress. Grace clapped her hands proudly when she saw how much space they had cleared. Emma touched a clean shelf gently, pleased with how far they had come. Daniel stood behind them, watching the two girls move around the room like they knew the place better each day. It amazed him how quickly they had turned a cold, dusty room into something hopeful. They decided to split the tasks that morning. Emma would finish organizing the remaining boxes, while Grace wanted to take on the kitchen, which needed deeper cleaning. Daniel offered to help both, not wanting to look lazy, but the girls told him he should take the lighter tasks so he wouldn't get exhausted. Grace picked up a bucket and began cleaning the kitchen with surprising enthusiasm. She hummed cheerful tunes and talked to herself every now and then, making Daniel smile from the doorway. She scrubbed the counters, washed the cabinets, cleaned hidden corners, and even polished the old stove until it shined more than he remembered. Emma, on the other hand, worked quietly but efficiently in the storeroom. She sorted tools, folded old cloths, organized books, and labeled boxes. She moved like someone who understood order and took pride in creating it. She didn't rush, but everything she touched slowly became neat and purposeful. Daniel found himself walking between the two rooms, watching them work. Sometimes he offered help. Sometimes he simply stood and listened to their voices, feeling comfort in the simple sound of people working together. It reminded him of when his parents were alive, how the house always had some noise, some movement. For years, the silence had grown thick around him. Now, it was finally breaking. Around midday, something unexpected happened. While Emma and Grace were both hard at work, Daniel heard a strange gushing sound coming from outside. He rushed through the back door and saw water spilling uncontrollably from the old pump behind the house. The pipe had burst, sending water across the yard and toward the storage area outside. Daniel panicked for a moment. He tried turning the pump off, but the valve was stuck. Before he could figure out what to do, Grace ran outside, followed by Emma. Grace didn't even hesitate. She grabbed a wooden board and used it like a shield to redirect the water away from the house while shouting instructions. Emma quickly pulled heavy sacks from the storage room to keep the water from reaching inside. Daniel was surprised at how fast they reacted, faster than he did. Working together, they managed to stop the water from spreading further. Daniel finally got the pump valve loose, and the water flow slowed until it stopped completely. The three of them stood there, soaked from the knees down, breathing hard. Grace burst out laughing first, wiping her forehead dramatically. Emma shook her head with a small smile, brushing wet hair out of her face. Daniel looked at them both, feeling a mixture of admiration and gratitude. He expected fear or frustration, but instead, they treated the small crisis as an adventure. Daniel apologized for the mess the broken pump created. Grace waved her hand and said it was the most exciting thing she had done all week. Emma added that it felt good to do something practical to help. For Daniel, their reaction meant more than they realized. It wasn't just about the broken pump, it was about feeling supported, something he hadn't experienced in a long time. After drying off, they went back inside and continued their work. But something had changed between them. The unexpected teamwork brought them closer. They began talking more freely, sharing stories from their past, laughing at simple things, and even teasing Daniel gently about needing new tools for the farm. During a short break, they all sat in the living room. Grace talked about her family, how she helped her mother with household bills, how she worked different small jobs in town, and how she was always searching for something stable. Emma shared that she had dreams of studying interior design someday, which made sense considering how she organized everything with such care. Daniel listened quietly, surprised by how mature and grounded they were despite their young age. He then talked a little about himself, too. Not much, but enough to let them understand him better. He told them about the years he spent trying to keep the farm alive, the loneliness that slowly crept in after his parents passed away, and how he never expected two strangers to step into his house and bring so much warmth. Grace's eyes softened, and Emma nodded gently, both understanding what he did not fully say. The afternoon passed smoothly. Grace finished cleaning the kitchen until it looked newer than ever. Emma finished the storeroom completely, leaving it neat enough to walk through without stepping over anything. Daniel helped wherever he could, lifting boxes, sweeping floors, and rearranging furniture. But more than anything, he found himself simply enjoying their presence. When the sun began to set, Emma suggested they check the living room as well. She wanted to organize the shelves and dust the furniture. Grace agreed and said the living room needed a fresh soul. Daniel laughed softly at her choice of words. Together, they tackled the living room. Grace dusted the windows, humming again. Emma arranged the books neatly, aligning them carefully. Daniel wiped the furniture and straightened picture frames. They worked together like a small team that had known each other for years. At one point, Grace found an old record player under a sheet. She asked Daniel if it still worked. Daniel wasn't sure, but when Emma cleaned it and plugged it in, it surprisingly turned on. They tried one of the old records Daniel's mother used to play. The music was soft and warm, filling the living room with a nostalgic melody. Grace began swinging her arms playfully to the music, making Emma laugh. Daniel watched them with quiet joy. It felt like a part of his childhood had returned. By the time they finished for the day, the house looked brighter than it had in years. The air felt clean. The walls felt less lonely. The girls stood back and admired the progress, proud of what they had achieved. Daniel thanked them sincerely, not just for the work, but for how they brought life back into the house. Grace told him not to thank them too much yet. They still had more ideas. Emma agreed softly, saying they weren't done improving the place. Before leaving, they asked Daniel if he would be fine alone for the night after such a long day. Daniel said he would, but he felt a strange sadness knowing the house would fall silent again until morning. Grace promised they would come early the next day. Emma added that they wanted to finish the living room and maybe freshen up the front porch. That night, after they drove away, Daniel walked through each cleaned room slowly. He touched the shelves, looked at the cleaned windows, opened the neat storeroom, and walked into the shining kitchen. Everything felt new, but the biggest change was something invisible. He no longer felt alone. The house was quiet, but not the same heavy, empty quiet he used to feel. Instead, it felt like the girls' laughter stayed in the air, like the music from the record player still echoed in the walls, like the place itself was waiting for them to return. Daniel sat down at the table, took a deep breath, and felt something warm inside him: hope. He realized the girls were not just cleaning his house. They were changing it, changing him, and changing the way he looked at his own life. The next morning came with a gentle breeze moving across the open fields. Daniel stepped outside with his cup of tea, looking down the road the way he always did now. For years he had lived each morning alone, only thinking about what work he had to finish on the farm. But today, like the last few days, he found himself waiting for the sound of a car, the laughter of the two girls, and the warm energy they always brought with them. His house was changing, and so was he. After a little while, dust rose on the road as a car approached. Daniel felt his heart lift. Grace leaned out the window, waving happily even before they reached the house. Emma smiled softly from the passenger seat. When they parked and stepped out, it felt like the sun shined a little brighter. Daniel welcomed them inside, and the girls immediately noticed how the house felt warmer and brighter than when they had first arrived. Grace jokingly asked if he stayed awake cleaning all night. Daniel laughed and said he only tidied a little because he didn't want to slow them down today. Emma nodded approvingly, saying it showed he was becoming a house person now. Daniel shook his head, yet he couldn't hide the smile on his face. The living room was their first task of the day. They had already cleaned it well the previous day, but now they wanted to decorate it, organize small details, and bring back the charm it once had. Grace started by opening the curtains wide to let sunlight flood in. Emma took out the books Daniel had stored away for years and arranged them neatly. Daniel dusted the wooden frames on the wall, some holding photos he had not looked at in a long time. As they worked, they talked more openly than before. Grace told a funny story about her younger brother, who once tried to cook and burned half the kitchen towel by accident. Emma shared a memory from school about how she once won an award for designing a small model house. Daniel listened with real interest, sometimes giving quiet comments, and other times simply enjoying the sound of conversation filling his home. During the organizing, Emma found a small wooden box tucked behind some books. When she opened it, she discovered old letters written by Daniel's mother. Daniel hadn't seen them in years. He held them gently, reading the first few lines. His eyes softened as memories came back. The girls didn't interrupt him. They simply sat nearby and waited until he closed the box again. Daniel thanked them for finding it, saying it meant a lot. After finishing the living room, they moved to the front porch. Grace insisted the porch could look beautiful with a bit of work. Daniel had almost forgotten how important the porch used to be. His parents would sit there every evening, talking and watching the sunset. But over time, dust gathered. Wood cracked, and he stopped sitting there altogether. The three of them cleaned it together. Grace swept away dirt and leaves. Emma wiped the railings and checked the wooden steps for damage. Daniel repaired a loose board and trimmed the small plants growing around the edges. When they were done, the porch looked welcoming again, clean, open, and full of possibility. Grace stepped back and crossed her arms proudly, saying it looked like a painting. Emma nodded, agreeing that it finally looked like a home. They returned inside for a break. Daniel brought out lemonade he had made earlier. Grace drank hers in big sips, saying it was the best lemonade she ever tasted. Emma drank quietly, but her content smile said enough. Daniel felt strangely proud, as if he had passed a cooking test he didn't know he was taking. After their break, they began focusing on the last remaining cluttered spots in the house. Emma wanted to clean the small back room that Daniel had used for storage. Grace wanted to polish the hallway and make the place smell fresh. Daniel helped wherever he could, but sometimes he simply stood and watched, appreciating the care they showed his home. In the back room, Emma found a stack of old newspapers tied with string. She asked Daniel if he needed them. He shook his head, saying he had kept them for no real reason. Grace laughed and said everyone had something they held on to even when it no longer mattered. Together, they decided to recycle the papers. Boxes that once sat untouched for years were opened, emptied, and neatly reorganized. Every corner they touched felt lighter. By afternoon, the house had transformed completely. The rooms were clean, bright, and organized. The air smelled fresh. The sound of footsteps echoed clearly instead of being swallowed by dust. Even the hallway, once dark and cluttered, looked long and open. Grace spread her arms and spun in a slow circle, amazed at how different everything looked. Emma placed her hands on her hips, satisfied with the result. Daniel stood silently for a moment, taking it all in. He didn't recognize his own home. It felt new but also familiar, like something he had always wanted but never knew how to achieve. He looked at the girls and felt something he had not felt in a very long time, gratitude that reached deep inside him. In the late afternoon, the girls gathered their things, preparing to leave. Even though they had finished the work, Daniel felt a sudden sadness. He understood they couldn't stay forever. They had their own lives, their own responsibilities, but he didn't want the connection they had built to disappear the moment they walked out the door. Grace noticed the change in his expression and nudged him lightly. She told him they weren't disappearing. Emma added softly that they would visit whenever they were free. Hearing that, Daniel felt relief wash over him. He realized that even if the cleaning job ended, their bond didn't have to end. Before stepping out, Grace looked around one last time and said, "This house feels happy now." Emma agreed, touching Daniel's arm gently and telling him he should keep it this way because he deserved to live in a warm place. Daniel didn't know how to answer. He simply nodded, feeling a quiet emotion he couldn't fully describe. When they finally drove away, Daniel stood on the porch, watching their car disappear down the road. But this time, the silence that followed did not feel empty. It felt peaceful. He walked through the rooms slowly, touching the cleaned shelves, looking at the shining windows and pausing in each doorway as if memorizing the change. In the living room, he sat down and listened to the soft echo of the house. For years, the house felt like a burden, a memory he was trapped inside. Now it felt like a place where life could begin again. Daniel realized something important. The ad he had placed was only meant to bring cleaners to his home, people who would help with the dust and clutter. But the two girls had done much more than that. They had brought conversation, laughter, and human warmth. They had reminded him what it felt like to have company, to share moments, to let others into his world. More than cleaning the rooms, they had cleaned away years of quiet loneliness he never admitted he carried. That evening, Daniel sat on the newly cleaned porch and watched the sunset, something he hadn't done in years, and for the first time in a very long time, he didn't feel alone. He felt connected, hopeful, and quietly thankful for the unexpected moment in life that brought two strangers to his door and changed his world without even trying.